going beyond the headlines.
Now you know with Rob Snow on News Radio.
Welcome to the show. It's David Smith here in for Rob Snow with you today. Thank you for joining us on a Friday. Love it. Let's get right to our first guest, regular contributor around here, Tom Korski, managing editor, Blacklock's reporter. Hello, Tom.
Hi, David.
How are you this week?
I have no complaints. Thank you for asking.
Good. Very good. Okay, let's start with this big carbon tax report. I'm going to be talking about this for the next 3 hours, and you're going to lead us off, Tom. What did the parliamentary budget officer say about the carbon tax?
He said there's a net economic cost. There's a net cost. Why does this matter? Well, the budget office has said this 3 times now. There have been 3 reports. And they say there's a net economic cost when you live in a very large subarctic country like ours. You cannot tax, at current rates, gasoline at 18 cents a liter on the carbon tax, rising to 37 cents a liter by 2030. You can't do that without a net economic cost. There will be some impact on jobs and economic production. Well, everyone knows this, but it has been in conflict with Cabinet's claims, bizarrely, that somehow through rebates that you receive quarterly from the feds, more than offset what you pay in higher fuel taxes built into every product and service that you consume. How is that possible? Cabinet's been asked this more times than I can. They will not accept that people do not get richer by paying taxes. It's inexplicable. I agree, but there we are.
What did the Environment Minister, Steven Guilbeault, sort of the cheerleader-in-chief for this specific climate policy, what did he have to say about this report that flies in the face of what the government has been arguing all of these years?
That's not the report I saw, he would say.
Oh.
And he would point to selections in the report that he liked. So there were parts of the movie that he liked, but the whole movie he wasn't crazy about because it completely contradicts the main thrust of the entire program. Guilbeault has a problem, and it's a serious problem, and this is illustrative of where the feds are. He insists, and he said yesterday, and he will say today and tomorrow, that emissions have come down. We did it, David. High five. We won the war against climate change.
Woohoo!
Problem. In Environment Canada's last report to the United Nations, they issue it every May. It's called the National Inventory Report. We read them all. The last National Inventory Report said for the last reporting period, hold on, emissions went up by 9 million tons. Not down. They actually went up.
Yeah.
And so you then ask, what was the point of this entire exercise? That's a rhetorical question.
Amazing. As I said, I'll have a lot more to say about that once we get into Talk Back at the top of this hour. Let's move along, Tom, to another story here on the theme of climate change and affordability. I'll just quote the first line of this story. Quote, Cabinet proposed renaming inflation as heatflation to persuade Canadians to associate the rising cost of living with climate change, documents show. They did what, Tom?
Privy Council in-house research, they have federal focus groups all the time. They're constantly having federal focus group to ask Canadians, how are we doing? What do you think about this or that? And what did they say? They asked people, what do you think about heatflation, or say maybe climateflation, to describe the cost of living when you pay more for spaghetti? And people said, what? Heat what? No one had heard of it. And they had to explain it to them 2 or 3 times. You say, well, it's because what you want to do is blame climate change, this sort of monster in the woods, as compared to what people in focus groups cited, like things like profiteering or taxes or government deficits, the government's fault. They said, no, how about heatflation? We can blame it on the sun, the rising price of spaghetti. People didn't really get it. It was a nice try, though, by the Privy Council office and their focus groups. By the way, this was not an inexpensive attempt. This was under an $800,000 contract with the Toronto pollster. I'm serious. This is on the level.
Yeah. Canadians agreed climate change might have some impact on inflation, but other factors were at play. Wow. Shocker. That's ridiculous. Heatflation. It's not inflation, Tom. It's heatflation. climate.
Can you imagine if someone came up to you in the newsroom? We're in the business of clarity. And someone said, all those stories you're doing about cost of living, we're going to start calling it heatflation. You say, are you drinking cough syrup? Are you being serious right now? And anyway, that's what they asked.
It's not climate change. It's a climate crisis. It's not inflation. It's heatflation.
Exactly.
All right, we have one more here. I'm going to play the clip first, and then we'll talk about it. I'm so glad you were watching this committee, because I saw the clip on social media, and I couldn't believe it. So we have the clip here of Nate Erskine Smith, Liberal MP, having a meltdown at a committee. Play the clip.
I thought Mr. Erskine Smith had more integrity than that, than to worried about $400
Point of order. Like, what is this
stolen
absolute?
from taxpayers.
This is absolute.
All right. Whoa.
Come on.
Okay,
come on,
all right.
Come on. My integrity.
Let's. Okay.
Right off.
Okay. All right.
Not very parliamentary, Tom. What had Nate Erskine Smith so upset?
Well, the Conservative MP Rick Perkins from Nova Scotia was needling him, and Erskine Smith fell for the bait, and he was needling him about Public Accounts Committee, as he described it, liberal corruption, malfeasance, waste of money, and general incompetence as we head into a pre-election period. Erskine Smith, by the way, as you recall, wanted to be Premier of Ontario. He unsuccessfully sought the leadership of the Ontario Liberal Party. You know what was most intolerable about this? I know some people are upset by the language. What's most intolerable, the real outrage, is 20 feet down the hallway, you will have the government House leader wringing her hands, playing Mother's Little Helper, on parliamentary decorum. She will give a speech on parliamentary decorum that would make Jesus weep. It's that beautiful. Well, Erskine Smith is using some pretty pungent language in committee, so that was disappointing.
Yeah, disappointing is a good word for it. Last week he was in the news because he managed to land the Prime Minister for an interview on his podcast. This week we're talking about this. How the mighty have fallen, Mr. Erskine. Well, I guess it's a good thing, Tom, that they get a whole week off for Thanksgiving. You and I get a day, but the Parliament gets a whole week off, so maybe they'll cool down.
Work.
Thank you for this week, Tom. Always great to hear from you.
Thank you, David.
That's Tom Korski, managing editor, Blacklock's reporter. That's why we subscribe. He's minding Ottawa's business, and thank goodness somebody is. I'm David Smith. This is Now You Know. I'm in for Rob Snow today. We'll be back right after this short break with Barry McLaughlin. You're listening to News Radio.
No question goes unasked or unanswered.
Now You Know with Rob Snow returns on News Radio.
David Smith here in for Rob Snow today. Thank you for joining us. Joining me on the line now, we have our regular Friday guest, Barry McLaughlin. Barry is a leadership communications consultant and a trainer who is president of TLC Transformational Leadership Consultants. He also teaches at the Telfer School of Management at Ottawa U and in the MBA program at the Shannon School of Business at Cape Breton University. Hi, Barry.
Hey, David. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you this week?
Great. Looking forward to a great long weekend.
Oh, yes. Not quite there yet. Some business to get to first. So let's dive in here. I want to pick up with you, Barry, something that we were talking about with the callers to this show earlier in the week about Pierre Poilievre's communication style. He's been criticized as being too harsh. The name-calling, the fights with reporters, the over-the-top sloganeering. I put together a little audio montage to illustrate what I'm talking about. If we can roll the tape on that, please.
When will we put an end to this wacko policy by this wacko Prime Minister?
It's clear now Justin Trudeau is seen as an absolute joke on the world stage.
Jagmeet Singh is a fake, a phony, a fraud, and a liar.
Currently, you're obviously taking the populist pathway.
What does that mean?
I mean, certainly you.
I think CP should stop acting as the communications arm of the PMO. The question is why. No, I asked you a question. You keep asking what the agreement.
We're the journalists. This is democracy. We ask the question.
I have the freedom to ask questions if I want. It might sound like something out of a horror film, not from the real world. But unfortunately, after 9 years of Trudeau and the NDP, the real world is a horror film.
Hey, he lays it on kind of thick sometimes, Barry. We took calls from people this week who say it's a turnoff, but other people say they like it. So I'm curious to get your take on this. It doesn't seem to be hurting the CPC at all in the polls. What do you think?
Well, you're right. I mean, it's amazing. We're looking at 20-point, numbers above the Liberals and the NDP. It's amazing how strong that has sustained. Normally you would say, look, you have to start shifting a gear here so we can see you as the Prime Minister on the G8 world stage there, and I guess G7 on the world stage, and to see what you would look like as a Prime Minister for all of Canada. He hasn't shown us that yet. So I talked to several Conservative MPs at this gathering recently, and they are very happy with his, go get him, hit him hard, attack the media. They love it. I gently said to them, I said, no, I figured the base and your immediate voter universe loves it, no doubt. But, in order to really cement this deal, you've got to reach that next segment, that wavering middle ground, not quite sure, don't like that style, don't like that approach. You could actually do it. You don't need to kind of continue to do this. We already know much of your commitment to the base. We get that. But I think they're not open to that. So it's a bit of a lost suggestion. I know for sure they have no intention of doing that.
Do you think, though, Barry, if it was a closer race, if the Prime Minister and the Liberals weren't as, just unbelievably unpopular as they are, do you think that would factor into it a little bit more? Is it necessary? I guess what I'm asking is, based on the polls, it doesn't seem like it's necessary for Poilievre to change anything.
Well, that's exactly what they say to you. Hey, what's broken that we need to fix? Sorry. And with regard to your point, it's a very interesting one. If it was neck and neck, would he continue this? I'd say he'd double down on this, because you only really, in Canada, we don't vote you in. We only vote out the current government. So that's pretty well the way it works. So he's reminding you of every conceivable, real, imagined, possible sin committed by Justin Trudeau and his government, and just hammering every one of them. So the thing has become an all-out kind of prosecution on everything. Let's stall the House while we proceed with this. And even if they have some legitimacy behind some of their requests, of course, I'm not saying they aren't legitimate, but they've chosen to be on all fronts on the battleground, leading the charge. And that, to me, that is a new world. I think Trump really did prove in 2016, and, even today, he's proven you can get half the population by doing that. And it is interesting that, there aren't very many middle ground people left anymore. So he's kind of figuring, well, ain't broke, I won't fix it.
Okay. Let's shift gears here. Another story I want to get your take on. This week was the 1-year anniversary of the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel. And since that day, we've seen a protest movement sweep across this country and other Western countries as well. I'd like to ask for your thoughts on how the Liberals have handled their communication strategy around this file. They've been criticized as being both too pro-Israel and also not pro-Israel enough. In fact, Justin Trudeau was asked about this morning. He's in Asia right now, but they wanted to ask him this morning about the Israel file. Roll the tape on that, please.
Domestic criticism coming from the Conservative leader that your government and you have been too sympathetic to the Palestinian cause and have not done enough to stop anti-Semitism in Canada and tamp down the messages that are being furthered in pro-Palestinian marches across the country.
Our position has been very, very clear. We've been calling for a ceasefire for many, many months now, since the end of last year. We've been pushing for more humanitarian aid. We've been pushing for the hostages to be released, for Hamas to lay down its arms, and have no role for Hamas in the future governance of Gaza. We've been pushing on Israel to abide by international law, even as it has the right to defend itself.
So you hear the first thing he says is our position has been clear. But the question was, I'm paraphrasing, Prime Minister, your position has not been clear on this. But he answers the question by saying our position has been clear. If it was clear, they wouldn't be asking the question. What do you think, Barry?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've tried to do, let's sit on the fence on this. Canada has historically sat on the fence. There were decades, I believe, where a UN resolution came forward, denouncing Israel, the annual denunciation. Canada always stayed neutral, until Alan Rock was the first minister who stood up in Israel's defense and voted against it. So we've tried this neutral, let's sit on the fence. We have a lot of Palestinian immigrants in Canada. There's no question it's not just political because of the sheer decimation of Gaza, the massive bombings by the IDF. You have to, when the Prime Minister, when Netanyahu said, this is about vengeance, it was in his first news conference. Oh yeah, it's vengeance. I still don't see enough of the hostages back, and we're bombing hospitals. Oh yeah, because I know the Hamas is in there. Okay, but we're doing the prosecution of it is hard for Canada to take as a country, based on any principles we have. But I do think that they have not communicated it well. It sounds like they're sitting on the fence. They should have been foursquare in support of Israel on October 7th and afterwards. It's true we can't tell Israel what to do, but they've tried to speak out. The problem is we're trying to do on the one hand and on the other. And you see Mr. Poilievre benefiting from this because he's foursquare behind Israel and really doesn't talk very much about the other side of this. It works when you're in opposition, much tougher when you're in government. But I think he needs to be clearer and crisper. The Jewish vote is important. I've talked to many Jewish people who feel they've been abandoned by this government. I mean, people really well known in the community that only have ever voted Liberal have said to me, come up to me and said, they're really demoralized about the way the government's handled this. So how much of it's real? How much of it's perception? But he's losing on this issue. And you heard in his voice today, I was stunned. He looks like the air went out of the balloon. Like he could be just exhausted from the trip, but he just seemed exhausted. He seemed just tired. That wasn't a foursquare defense of Canada's policy. It was very, very, he sounds exhausted by the entire subject.
Yeah. Okay, Barry, that's our time for this week. Excellent analysis as always. I hope you have a very happy Thanksgiving, my friend.
Thank you, David, and you too.
Take care. That's Barry McLaughlin. He's with us on a Friday. President, TLC Transformational Leadership Consultants. I am David Smith, in for Rob Snow today. Don't go anywhere. We're back right after this on News Radio.
Critical thinking is not dead.
Now you know with Rob Snow.
Returns on News Radio.
Coming up to the bottom of the hour, it's David Smith here in for Rob Snow today. Another major story today to mention quickly here before the news. Got the unemployment report from StatsCan. Canada's unemployment rate declined to 6.5% last month, the first slide since January. The economy added 47,000 jobs in September. Youth and women aged 25 to 54 leading that. Something StatsCan always releases as part of this report as well that I find interesting is unemployment rates for individual cities. So Canada, across the board, 6.5% unemployment. If you break it down by major cities, Halifax, 5.5%. Quebec City, 4.3% unemployment. Ottawa, here in the nation's capital, 6.3%. Toronto, 8% unemployment for September in the city of Toronto. Calgary, 7.4%. So almost a full point higher than the national average. Edmonton, 9%. What's going on in Edmonton? 9% unemployment. And Vancouver, 6.3% unemployment. So again, despite the job gains in September, StatsCan says the employment rate was lower, reflecting continued growth in the population. We're adding jobs, but we're adding people faster than we're adding jobs. That's the summary on the unemployment report for you. Coming up here after the news, we'll do the Newsday panel. Stick around. I'm David Smith. This is News Radio.
Now you know with Rob Snow continues on News Radio. The Newsday panel.
It's David Smith here in for Rob today. This is the Newsday panel. Let's get it going. Our panelists today include Chris Sims, Alberta Director, Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Hello, Chris.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. How are things in Lethbridge today?
Sunny and beautiful with just a hint of Thanksgiving crispness in the air.
Ooh, lovely. And Alex Creston is here as well, Vice President with Crestview Strategy in the center of the universe. How are you, Alex?
Oh, it's always nice in the center of the universe.
He's in Toronto today. Okay, let's get into this. The Parliamentary Budget Officer's latest report on the carbon tax confirms that the policy leaves Canadians economically worse off, even though the carbon tax rebate does, in fact, cover the cost of the direct consumer carbon tax if you're an average household, an average driver being less than 15,000 kilometers in a year. What is your reaction to this report? I will start with you, Chris Sims.
It kind of reminds us of, remember that great Bill Murray movie, Groundhog Day?
Yes.
Where he's just doomed to repeat the same thing over and over again. I kind of feel bad for the Parliamentary Budget Officer because they keep on finding the same thing over and over again. And that is, of course, a tax will not make people richer. That when you put a humongous tax onto people, it makes them poorer. It makes things more expensive. And the very idea that he keeps needing to say this over and over again is a little bit frustrating. So to your point exactly, if you only take, for example, Monica filling up her Honda Civic little hatchback and spending an extra $8 and only driving the average amount, sure. But the moment you actually consider somebody who drives a little bit more often, who might have to have a bigger family vehicle, or, the economic impact of the carbon tax, so all of the other layers of the carbon tax that you have to pay, then it actually costs you money. So to see Guilbeault yesterday coming out in his scrum saying that, here, this vindicates me, look, you actually get more back than you pay in, that's like saying that you're sticking strictly to your diet as long as you don't count the big plate of poutine you had after your beer binge.
Okay. Well, you brought up Mr. Guilbeault. I was going to save the clip, but you brought it up, so let's listen to it here. Let's listen to it here. This is the Stephen Guilbeault, cheerleader-in-chief for the carbon tax, had to comment on this report yesterday with the parliamentary press gallery pressing him with pesky, annoying questions. This is what he had to say.
The overall conclusion from the PBO, from his briefing, from his report, is that, we made an error, but largely the conclusion was the same. When you look at the economic costs, when you look at the household costs, you're paying more. So essentially they were right. Do you agree with that? Do you agree that this was not a really big mistake?
That's not what this report says. And the report also says that he acknowledges that he does not take into account the economic benefits that are resulting from carbon pricing in Canada and those benefits to households. That he doesn't take into account the economic impacts to households of climate change and natural catastrophes going up in this country. And hopefully in future reports he will be able to do that. But I think the first paragraph of this report is very clear. More Canadians get more money back than what they pay for carbon pricing.
So, Alex, he says it's clear. What's wrong with Mr. Guilbeault's analysis?
Well, Mr. Guilbeault's analysis seems to include a giant, undefinable alternative scenario that is unmeasurable. So, of course, he'd like to lean on it. The fact that this tax will make people worse off. Of course it will. And that's what it's designed to do. That's the only way. Even if you believed in the carbon tax, you would have to admit that by paying it, it will cost you more. Therefore, you'll make another choice in your life, right? Otherwise,
Bingo.
Why would you even do it? So the biggest problem this government's made is by saying that somehow the tax will enrich you. This is why they have this authenticity gap, which is going to kill them in the next election.
That is such a good point, Alex. And Chris, picking up on that, from where I'm sitting, if I'm trying to make an argument for the carbon tax as a good thing, the argument should be fighting climate change is going to cost you a couple $100, but it's the right thing to do, and you're going to be canceling out costs X, Y, and Z that we don't even know how big they are yet for future generations. Think about your kids. It might cost you a little bit now, and we're going to help you out with that if you're lower income. They could make that argument, Chris, but they're not. So what do you think the political implications of this report are? Can we put the whole thing to bed now? Is the carbon tax the worst policy any Canadian government's ever come up with?
Yeah, especially with the way they defend it, and exactly to both of your points. If you wanted to defend the carbon tax, then they should have stuck to their original wording, and that was when all their staff got together, they came up from Queen's Park, the same team of people that brought you the disastrous green energy scandal of the Ontario Liberal government. They trotted up to Ottawa when they lost government in Toronto, and they helped form the Trudeau government. And guess what? They helped write the legislation for the carbon tax. And back then, they called the carbon tax punishment for the use of fossil fuels. Meaning, you will be punished for using natural gas, for using gasoline, for using diesel. And it was exactly your argument that you just gave there. Pay a little bit more now, blah, blah, blah. But then, for some reason, they just caved on that. And they refused to admit that they're financially punishing people. And now, they don't know where to go. They've painted themselves into such a tight corner, they've got nothing anymore. And to reaching out to people who are truly worried about the environment, here in Canada, we produce less than 1.5% of global emissions, meaning, God forbid, if we all went into a cave and stopped doing everything, we wouldn't make a dent in global emissions. Further, even with the carbon tax in Canada, our emissions continue to increase. We have not hit one of our emissions targets since we started the carbon tax in Canada back in 2008. So if this is your environmental solution, you're failing.
Alex, what are the political implications of this second report on the carbon tax? It's a neat trick for the Liberals. They've actually managed to put the nails in their own political coffin.
It's just more of the same. It continues. The more they continue to sell this story that nobody's buying, the more they end up with this, what I said before, an authenticity gap, which I think is beyond anything else. That's why you see young Canadians most motivated to vote for the Conservative Party for the first time in my memory. That's because the Trudeau Liberals have lost what they had as the beginning, which was, even if you didn't like what they were doing, you believed that they authentically believed in what they were doing, and that's long gone.
Okay, we have to stop here. More issues to get to coming up in a few moments, a short break. I'm David Smith in for Rob Snow. Today, this is the Newsday panel. You are listening to News Radio.
Now you know with Rob Snow continues on News Radio.
It's David Smith here in for Rob again today. Thank you for joining us. We're in the middle of our Newsday panel. I have on the line with me Chris Sims, Alberta Director, Canadian Taxpayers Federation, as well as Alex Creston, Vice President at Crestview Strategy. Another major story this week, we marked the one-year anniversary of the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel. Since that day, we've seen a protest movement sweep across Canada. Some call them pro-Palestine groups, others call them anti-Israel groups. Really depends on the day. This week, Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, called for one of these groups organizing these protests to be banned in Canada. It's called Samidoun. Here's what one of their protests sounds like.
Do not wonder how revolution could possibly be done. Men who have never known a free day, who have lived their entire lives under the thumb of one of the most powerful settler colonies in the world, built paragliders to fly over a wall so high that it blocked out the sun when you stood underneath it. Do not wonder how revolution can be done. We must do it. Death to Canada. Death to the United States. And death to Israel.
And the crowd cheers. The crowd cheers for that. That was in British Columbia earlier this week. It leaves me speechless every time I play that clip. So, Alex, if you're the Liberal government, how could you possibly defend allowing a group like that in Canada?
I think the important distinction here is this group and groups like it are in Canada because they are Canadians, and I think that's the biggest issue here. Is that there's something has changed in Canada. There's always been sort of radical protest movements, and there's always, maybe more so in BC than in other places. But this has taken a turn, and they've used October 7th to celebrate mass murder and terrorism. And when I talk to people here, when I talk particularly to my Jewish friends and neighbors, over the last year, they've had a hard time, and they've been frightened. And not because of something that's going on halfway around the world, not because of something that's going on in Israel. They're frightened for their safety and the safety of their families here in Canada. And, when we were all growing up, none of us, had to live with that kind of fear. And so this is really unprecedented for, the last several generations of Canadians to have to live with fear of violence and maybe even violent revolution. There's something wrong here.
You won't find a stronger defender of freedom of expression than me. I'll say that right now. But Chris Sims, I worry that this phenomenon is heading somewhere bad. And I think there might be a reasonable need for some government action on this. What do you think?
Well, to be honest, I hadn't heard that clip yet, so I'm kind of surprised hearing that for the first time. My experience has been very similar, just personally, not Taxpayers Federation. It isn't really our wheelhouse, but just personally, I've been hearing from a lot of my Jewish friends over the past year, and it has been a really rough time, and most of them are grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. So it's been pretty tough. As far as this particular instance goes, I think in this case I would have to go back to accountable government. So if people don't like anything that's going on, frankly, in their streets, in their neighborhoods, what's going on in their communities, they need to contact their member of parliament. And they need to hold their member of parliament to account, no matter what it is. And if they can get enough of a group of people together that speak for them and hold that member of parliament to account in order to speak for them within the House of Commons, I think that is the beauty of our system, and that is the entire role of accountable government. So I would encourage folks, if that's happening in their neighborhood and they don't like it, they need to reach out to their MP.
Good point. Okay, we'll stop here. Thank you for those thoughts on that. It's a difficult topic, but it's one that we need to continue talking about. Thank you for your thoughts on that story. I'm David Smith. This is the Newsday panel. I'm here with Chris Sims from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Alex Creston from Crestview Strategy. We'll take a short break here. When we come back, we'll turn to a lighter topic, have a little bit of fun, talk about when that election might happen anyway. Whether or not Justin Trudeau is going to stick around. That's coming up next. I'm David Smith. This is News Radio.
There is no question Rob won't get answered.
Now You Know with Rob Snow continues
on News Radio.
David Smith in for Rob Snow today. Thank you for joining us here on News Radio. This is the Newsday panel. I have with me Alex Creston from Crestview Strategy and Chris Sims from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, a couple of keen political observers. So we've been asking our panelists all week long for their election prediction. And this is an especially fun game because depending on the day and the week, your answer might change. So Alex, I'll start with you. When do you think there will be a federal election in this country?
It's almost easier for me to say when I think that there won't be a federal election in this country. And I think I've been pretty consistent when you guys ask this, and I don't think it's going to be in 2024. As much as I think, we who watch this kind of thing, would love to see some sort of an October surprise. I still haven't seen a reason why the NDP would pull the plug on this government yet. I still haven't seen a reason that their incentives have changed, and that they would want to go to an election this early. So unless something big changes in the next couple of weeks, I think we're looking at this government continuing on until at least 2025.
There has to be a fall economic statement. When does that usually happen, Alex? November or late October?
November.
November. Because I have heard people suggest they may prorogue after the fall economic statement, come back in the spring, table a budget that's more or less an election platform, and then we're off to the races. What do you think about that, Chris? What's your prediction?
Well, I've been hot and cold on predictions. I think I was the only one in the press gallery that said that Trump was going to win in 2016, and I was right. It was a big, beautiful prediction. All those other predictions, losers. So I got that one right. This time, I believe Mr. Singh, Jagmeet Singh, comes up for his pension in February, this coming February 2025. Then you're right, we're going to roll into a budget. And so I think that they will fall on that budget, which is an automatic confidence vote because it's a money bill. And then I think we're off to a spring election, April, May, right around Easter.
April, May. So no Christmas election? I was kind of hoping for a Christmas election.
Well, we can all wish and dream. And I thought he was going to take a walk in the snow last Christmas, but he's hung on for another year. But I think that Mr. Singh's pension kicks in, like he gets qualified for it in February.
Yeah,
and it's
right.
a lot of money.
Yeah.
I think over the rest of his lifetime, it's like close to $2 million or something over that span.
Thereabouts.
Yeah.
But they did, Alex, I guess my last point on this, because we only have a minute, the thing for me that changed this week was they passed the Pharmacare bill yesterday. Pharmacare bill. Pardon me. They passed that yesterday. So that's the NDP's big, promise to the voters. Well, we got this done for you, so you should elect us again. Anything to that?
I think unless they saw that the voters, really gave them credit and saw that there was a big change in the polls, then maybe they would think that. But I think, so far voters haven't done that with anything that that the NDP has delivered. So I think that there's more in the calculation than just did they complete their stated mandate and is the leader going to get a pension.
Right.
They're worried about. They've got to be worried about how they end up, how many seats they end up with after the election, and what kind of position they're left in.
Yeah.
It's sort of like playing pool. Where does that cue ball end up?
Yep. All right. Sorry to cut you off. We got to run. We're right out of time. Thank you both for today. Really appreciate it. This is News Radio.
It's time to talk back.
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now.
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
Friday. We have made it to the end of the week, rolling into the Thanksgiving long weekend. I, for one, am looking forward to that, but we're not there yet. So let's get down to business here on Talk Back on News Radio 1-833-668-2577. I'm David Smith in for Rob Snow today. Thank you for joining us. And as usual on a Friday, I'm open to talking about pretty much anything you want to talk about. Phone lines are open for you now. 1-833-668-2577. But the big story today, an obvious one if you ask me, is the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report on the carbon tax. If you're just catching up today, the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, a nonpartisan, independent watchdog for government spending, he's issued a new report tallying up how much Canadians are paying for the carbon tax. How much of that is offset by the carbon tax rebates that the government sends out 4 times a year. Here's what the PBO has found. There's basically 2 stories here coming out of this report. 2 conclusions from the carbon tax report. Headline number 1. The average Canadian household gets back more in carbon tax rebates than they directly pay in carbon tax. That means that the average, not everyone, but on average, a household will get back more in carbon tax rebates than they actually pay in the carbon tax. So, for example, the carbon tax right now is 17 cents a liter on gasoline. The PBO has found for the average, again, the average household, if you add up all of those 17-cent payments on all those liters of gasoline, it's still not as much as you get back in your quarterly carbon tax rebate. That's headline number one. But don't go celebrating just yet. Headline number two from the PBO report. If you also factor in the indirect costs of the carbon tax on goods and services, then the PBO has found the average household ends up worse off. This is what those of us who have been critics of this government policy have been saying all along. Economically, in the big picture, Canadians are in fact worse off financially because of the carbon tax. So what does that mean? Well, it means a lot of things. But I think you should think about it like this. The carbon tax is lowering Canada's emissions, which is the goal. But it comes at a cost. Lowering emissions costs us all. Climate action costs you as an individual. So my question for you today is this. Is it worth it? Are you willing to pay more for things to reduce Canada's emissions? 1-833-668-2577. To me, that's really what this whole debate has boiled down to. Is it worth doing this? Is it worth inflicting this pain on ourselves to meet Canada's emissions reductions targets? Some people say yes. Some people say no. 1-833-668-2577. What are the politicians saying today? Well, everyone claims they've won the debate. The government, the Liberals, they say this report proves what they've been saying all along, that most Canadians are better off because they pay the carbon tax. Here's the Federal Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, Stephen Guilbeault.
First paragraph of the report. Considering only the fiscal impact of the federal fuel charge, PBO estimates that average household in each of the backstop provinces in 2030-2031 will see a net gain, receiving more from the Canada carbon rebate than the total amount they pay in federal fuel charge. That's what the PBO report says. So now's the time to clear the air on Pierre Poilievre's big lie to Canadian. He's been misleading Canadian. The PBO is very clear. More Canadians get money back from the Canada carbon rebate than what they pay. That's very clear.
He says it's very clear. He read the first paragraph, and it's clear. I read the report twice, and that is what the first paragraph says. He's quoting it accurately there. Would you like to know what the third paragraph says? Same report. Quote, in 2030, taking into consideration both fiscal and economic impacts, PBO estimates that the average household in each of the backstop provinces will see a net cost, paying more in the federal fuel charge and related goods and services tax, as well as receiving lower incomes compared to the Canada carbon rebate that they receive. End quote. That's the paragraph that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre wants us to focus on. Here's Poilievre.
The Parliamentary Budget Officer released another report today on the carbon tax. And that report confirmed everything I've been saying about this horrible tax, this ripoff. It showed that 60% of Canadians pay more in the carbon tax than they get back in rebates. 100% of middle-class Canadians lose out. And that gap will get worse as ahead with its Liberal NDP plan to quadruple the tax to 61 cents a litre over the next 5.5 years.
The Environment Minister says this report shows that Poilievre is lying. Poilievre says it shows that he's telling the truth. So that's where we find ourselves today. Yes, you'll get back more in Canada carbon rebates, than you actually pay at the pump in carbon tax for an average household. But no, you are not better off because of the carbon tax. It costs you money. Is it worth it? Should we keep doing this? 1-833-668-2577. I would welcome your thoughts on that story, comments, questions, concerns. I will do my best to help you make sense of this thing. Just give us a call now. Get on the air to have your say. We'll take the calls coming up next. This is Talk Back on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
David Smith here, in with you on a Friday on Talkback. This is News Radio. Thank you for joining us. The big story I want to talk about today, I'm open to talking about pretty much anything, but the big one I want to talk about is this carbon tax report from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. He has crunched the numbers, and when you add it all up, no, you're not better off because of the carbon tax. A lot of us have been saying that for a long time. We have some reporting now to verify it. So yes, the carbon tax, according to Environment and Climate Change Canada, will reduce Canada's emissions. But it comes at a cost to you. And I just want to know if you think that's worth it. Is it worth it to pay extra for stuff to reduce Canada's emissions? 1-833-668-2577. Well, let's get going here on Talkback. Up first, caller Christina from Calgary. Hi, Christina.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing fine. What's your take on this one?
So you'll have to forgive me because I am relatively ignorant on this subject.
That's
but
okay.
From what I understand, we're taking money and then we're just giving it back. So is there not a better way to fight climate change than just paying more in taxes and driving up inflation? Could we not be looking into other solutions besides taxes? More taxes?
It's a good point that you make, Christina, and the government would tell you that we are. This is one part of a whole suite of things that we're doing to reduce Canada's emissions. What I can tell you, Christina, is that the carbon tax has two parts to it, okay? There's the surcharge that you pay when you fill up your car, 17 cents a liter. Right. But then there's this other thing called industrial carbon pricing, and that's how industrial emitters, oil sands projects, etc., that's how they pay for their emissions. That's totally separate. That system, according to Environment and Climate Change Canada, is way more effective at reducing emissions than the consumer carbon tax by a factor of about 6 times. It's about 6 times as effective. So some people have said, why don't we just beef that system up more, put more onus on industrial emitters, and give people a break at the pumps? That's what I would like to happen. Sounds like you're on board with that.
I'm 100% on board with that. Like, I think I'm one of those people that actually gets a rebate from the carbon tax. But I feel like you're just taking money and pumping it into the government, and they're mismanaging it, and then under the illusion of giving it back to us. So why don't they just not take it to begin with? Is my kind of take on it. And then in terms of the climate change, there's also things like, from what I understand, some provinces don't even have recycling programs in place. Why don't we start micromanaging provinces like that rather than just taking more money in taxes? I think that there's a big gap in what provinces have to do in terms of recycling and their climate change as well.
Yeah, I don't know too much specifically about the recycling side of things, but that's a complaint that I've heard over the years as well, Christina. We've become so focused on emissions. We're so focused on emissions that other more practical things like recycling seem to have been neglected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think about the cost of the checks that come in the mail and all of the staff that are sending these checks and all of the salaries that we're paying for them, only to get a rebate on it. So it seems kind of counterproductive when you look at it from that standpoint, in my opinion.
Okay, great thoughts today, Christina. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's Christina in Calgary. Up next is Rachel in Calgary. Hi there, Rachel.
Hi, David. How are you?
I'm doing fine. What's your take on this one?
basically what Christina said. I just don't understand what's the point of the tax, because it's not like I'm doing anything different. I still need to get gas to go to work. I still need to heat my house. I'm not doing anything different. It's not incentivizing me to cut my own emissions. I still need to do all that to live.
Well, that's an interesting comment in and of itself, Rachel, because the government will say that it is working. It is encouraging Canadians to make different choices. And, maybe they're right for some people. I guess if you have the money and you don't like paying higher gas prices, you'll buy an electric car. But I don't think that that's the majority of people.
No, the average Canadian cannot afford to buy an electric car. And the biggest majority of people is the average Canadian.
So, Rachel, you get the rebates, but they're not doing you any good. This whole thing is not going to change your behavior, right?
No, it's not.
So you say just, I guess, axe the tax?
Well, of course, I would love that. But it's also the whole carrot and stick point, where you incentivize people to cut emission. It's like, instead of punishing people for, having to do their daily things, getting gas or heat their house, it's like, okay, well, if you use up to a certain point, say, for example, your electricity or your heating bill up to a certain point, and say you don't use it fully to that point, you get some money back.
Yeah, that makes good sense to me. And I think the gap between those two ideas is just politics at this point, which is kind of sad. All right, Rachel, thank you for your thoughts today. Really appreciate that. Have to run for a break. Thank you. That's Rachel in Calgary. We're just getting started here. Everyone hang on the line. There's one phone line for you, 1-833-668-2577. I'm David Smith. This is Talkback on News Radio. We're back right after this.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now. Hello. 1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Yeah, talking about the carbon tax again, but with good reason. New report, new information, new debate. Fighting climate change comes at a cost. That's the conclusion I take away from the Parliamentary Budget Officer's latest carbon tax report. It blows a hole in the Liberal narrative that you can fight climate change and make money doing it via a progressive carbon tax. These numbers don't add up with what the Liberals have been saying. That's the fact. They're just numbers. The numbers don't care about your feelings. But the question is, if it does cost you a little bit, but it reduces Canada's emissions overall, is that important enough to you that you can accept spending more money on stuff? Is it worth it? Let's go next on the phones to Russ from Alberta. Hi, Russ.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good, Russ. I'm good. What's your take on the carbon tax?
Well, I'm amazed that anybody would have expected any kind of a result that carbon tax is not neutral. There's no way anybody would have thought of that. Must just do some thinking, because every time the carbon tax goes up, businesses have to raise to cover all the carbon tax. Everybody, all the way along, chain does. So I don't know how this Liberal government can convince people that you're better off. It just doesn't make any sense. And anybody that is wide awake and pays taxes and just takes a look, if he raises it, the guy heating the warehouse the farmer has to raise his prices. The trucking guy has to raise his prices. The warehouse guy has to raise his prices to cover for his additional heating and his additional costs. It just goes on and on and on. So I don't know how anybody in his right mind would think that it's revenue neutral. It just doesn't. I don't know. Maybe there's no common sense left in this country anymore.
That's a possibility, Russ. That's a possibility. But given that we have established this now, that this thing is not neutral on cost for the consumer, do you think it's worth keeping it in place? They say it's going to reduce emissions. They have the forecast. It's 13 megatons. Is it worth it?
Take it out. quit selling coal to China like we sell the boatloads, sell them natural gas, and take it as a world issue. We can shut the country down and not make one iota difference. You will not stop one of those fires that are bad forest management. You won't stop anything. So all we're doing is we're killing the Canadian people. We're not a big enough issue. The best scenario I saw was Australia years ago. There was a guy sitting there talking about, and I think Australia is not much different than Canada. And he had a pile of sand there, and he said, okay, he went in with a little teaspoon and said, okay, there's our percentage. So we're going to tax this, but this is building every day. So how are we going to balance it? So I'm sorry, you cannot convince me that Canada's little 1.5%, no matter what we do, if we really want to do something, instead of shipping coal, let's ship natural gas. We could cut out, in a year, we could cut out all that we're doing. So, you know what, there's no way that a tax is going to help. I don't care what they think. That's all the Ontario, McGinnity, that government that was in Ontario, that when Trudeau got in, he brought them all in from Ottawa, into Ottawa, because they're green in there. And Ontario's still paying for that crap. So anyway,
yeah, we are. We are.
That's just my opinion. And and Trudeau hired all of those losers that what's her name had,
Kathleen Wynne. Yeah,
and brought them all in to his government and brought in all those same laws and rules and you know, I don't understand it. And how can Grbeau sit there and say Canadians are better off?
Yeah, I don't know. All right, Russ, thank you for your thoughts. Great opinions today. Appreciate the call.
Bye.
That's how it works. You call, you have your say. Get on the air, off the air, and back to your day. Coming up to the bottom of the hour, please hang on the line. We have 2 hours to talk about this. Open to other topics as well, but I think this is the big story today. I'm David Smith, filling in for Rob Snow today. 1-833-668-2577. This is Talk Back. We're back right after your latest breaking news here at the bottom of the hour on News Radio.
It's time to talk back
on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now
and have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
Welcome back to Talk Back on News Radio. It's David Smith here, in for Rob Snow on a Friday, getting closer to that Thanksgiving long weekend, which I am very much looking forward to. Really interesting issue today. Another report from the Parliamentary Budget Officer out just yesterday. Really in-depth look at what the carbon tax actually costs Canadians. And even though you get those rebates 4 times a year, the next one actually comes out next Tuesday, right after...
Now You Know with Rob Snow has the answers.
Sorry about that. Right after Thanksgiving. When you add up all the indirect costs that businesses pass on to consumers with higher prices, then most Canadians end up paying more per year to live in Canada. Now, the flip side of that equation, climate change and fighting climate change comes at a cost. It's not free to reduce emissions. It's going to make things more expensive. But not fighting climate change also comes at a cost. Hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, etc. All of these things have costs associated with them as well, but they're further down the road. They're harder to quantify. So is it worth it? Is it worth it to pay more now to reduce Canada's emissions? Because when you drill down on it, fighting climate change means reducing Canada's emissions, but is that doing enough to fight climate change to justify the cost to you? That's what I'm interested in. Up next on the phones is Ian from Kitchener. Hi there, Ian.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. What's your take on this one?
Okay, so the definition of insanity, they always say, is to do the same thing and expect different results. And that's sort of one area where I think a lot of people aren't realizing that, you know, we keep saying, our emissions aren't that much compared to the rest of the world. But per capita, Canadians, we're actually some of the worst emitters in the world. Anyways, I wanted to sort of bring up a point. Like, I've been off the grid for quite some time now. My home has not had a gas meter for the last year plus, but I've also had, I did the solar, I drive the electric car, I got the air source heat pump, I have on-demand electric hot water. And I guess my point is that everyone who belly aches about all of this stuff, I kind of look at it as like, well, what is it you're actually doing yourself to not have to worry about this stuff where, whether the carbon tax works or not, you're kind of like independent. And, I'm not saying you do all this stuff all at once. Like little steps do make a difference as you go along. But I've been doing this for like 20 years and it's really frustrating. I have a cabin north as well that's completely off the grid. It was my parents, and it's what got me into all this stuff. And as an example, I got tired of paying for gas for a boat, so I bought a pontoon boat, and I converted it to solar electric. There's a lot of smart people in Canada, but when you keep belly aching about stuff and then you don't be proactive about it.
What do you mean by belly aching? What do you mean by belly aching?
Well, you can't, belly ache about the cost of gas when you keep driving a gas car. You made that choice.
Why not? That's not a choice that I'm making. I can't afford an electric car, Ian.
And I would argue with you on that because, well, even used electric cars now, I can get a Model 3 for around $30,000.
$30,000? My current car is 5 years old and it costs $16,000.
Well, but then add up all the gas, add up all the maintenance, et cetera.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter because I can't make a car payment on a $30,000 car. You know what I mean? You hear what I'm saying? It's not an option for everyone, but this tax applies to everyone.
But you're making the payments with the gas, and a lot of I actually helped to run a very large electric vehicle group in the Waterloo region, and a lot of them will tell you the gas savings when you're not paying for gas goes perhaps to that little extra cost of the electric car. I have single moms who in our group who tell me like they can't afford gas. This is a cheaper route. The point is this. If we don't do something, and to your point about, hurricanes, everything else, we just saw what just happened in the States, and it's devastating, and it's only going to get the worse.
Okay. Ian, I'm enjoying the conversation, Ian. I just want to sort of wrap things up here so we can get to some other callers. So back to my original question, it is worth it to you to pay a little more for things now to fight climate change. It is worth it to you.
Yeah, because you know what? For me, it's freedom. I look at my bills now, they're next to nothing because I've taken the proactive approach to take care of, my life and not worry about, propping up big oil. As taxpayers, we prop up big healthcare because of gas transportation as well. Like you can throw all that into it as well. We need, Alberta's now no longer using coal. Mm-hmm. Being proactive. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And, it's those things that, little steps, a little bit at a time.
Okay. I hear you. Thank you, Ian. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed the conversation today. I need to move along, but thank you. That's a different take for you. Okay. I would just come back to this. It's not an option for everyone. And I really do mean that. Let's say I rework all of my finances. I get the money together to buy a used electric car. Where am I going to charge it? I can't put an electric car charger into my home. I don't own the home. My landlord owns the home. It's a heritage home. You think it's going to be easy to put an electric car charger into it? No. No garage. Lots of other things you have to consider. Let's get back to the phones. John from Halifax. Hi, John. Hello, John.
Hi, sorry.
No problem. What's your take today?
Well, I hardly know where to start. I don't think I'll comment too much on the gas tax. People have said everything that I would say, and I agree. It's not a good policy. I don't know when we're going to get rid of this guy. He's absolutely the worst prime minister the country's ever had. He's unethical and has proven that. He has no capacity for policy, and I just wish we would all open our eyes and see the damage he's doing to the country. This is just one example. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, John. Very concise today. And that works out because we have to stop for a short break. There's a phone line for you, 1-833-668-2577. Very busy today. I appreciate your patience. We'll get to everybody's call if you can hang on. I'm David Smith. This is Talk Back on News Radio.
something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
David Smith here, and for Rob Snow today, thank you for joining us, talking about the carbon tax. Another report from the Parliamentary Budget Office says that Canadian consumers are in fact worse off because we pay a carbon tax. My question for you, if it does work to reduce Canada's emissions, is it worth it? Pay a little bit more, fight climate change. Up next on the phones, we have Paul in Cambridge. Hello, Paul.
How you doing today?
I'm good, Paul. What's your take?
Okay, just yesterday, as a matter of fact, I went online, I went to the Canadian government's website and looked at their calculator, and here in Ontario, I will get back $560 in a carbon rebate.
Okay.
Okay, so I went to my gas suppliers. I downloaded all my bills over the last 24 months and totaled up the carbon tax that I paid over that 24 months and then divided by 24 to get an average. Now, of course, early on, the carbon tax was a lot less. So in actual fact, right now, the average, the actual amount would be much higher. But I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt and giving an average over 24 months.
Okay.
So my monthly carbon tax per year is going to be $278 per year. Plus to heat my home, heat my water, have a gas water heater, and cook my food.
Yep.
That leaves $282. We're now paying 17.5 cents per liter. So in theory, I could buy 1,600 liters of gasoline. Might seem like a lot, but that's only 30 liters a week. And even a compact car driven back and forth to work is going to use that up with no side trips.
Yep.
So now I am now one of the 2 in 10 that do not get back more than what I pay in carbon tax.
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you, Paul. You're not an average user of fossil fuels. Like they base these things off of averages, and one of the averages is if you drive more than 15,000 kilometers a year, that's too much. You're not going to get it all back in rebates. You're driving too much. Sorry, Paul.
We're going to lose. And that's just on home heating and fuel for my vehicle. Let's add in the additional costs for every single item that I buy at a store. It was all sent to that store in a vehicle that was subject to carbon tax on the fuel that they used. They don't absorb that cost. They roll it off over to me. Even my hydro. Yeah, you might say, well, hey, there's no carbon tax on hydro. Ontario Hydro, all their vehicles are typically either gasoline or diesel, which is subject to carbon tax, which then gets rolled onto my bill as well. So no matter what I buy, I'm paying a carbon tax on it. Now, here's the kicker.
Yes.
On top of the carbon tax that's added to my heating bill, the tax added for my fuel, to add insult to injury, the government then adds HST on top of the carbon tax.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
You know, so like I say, I'm one of the 2 out of 10 that aren't getting more back. And I'll tell you something. Other people have mentioned it before, saying, about Canadians being a high per capita polluter.
Yes.
There's an old saying, figures lie and liars figure. Canada produces less than 2% of the world's carbon emissions each year.
That's true, but per capita our emissions are quite high. We're energy hogs. Part of that is just climate related, but part of it's lifestyle related as well.
But China produces more than 30% of the world's carbon emissions.
Yeah.
So we turn around, we put a carbon emission or carbon tax on all the manufacturers here in Canada. You make it unfeasible for them to operate in Canada. You drive them offshore, and where do they go to? They go to places like China that has no restrictions on pollution.
Yeah.
So all we do is we drive. We could go down to 0%, and it won't make any difference because China will be perfectly willing to pick up the slack.
All right, I got you down, Paul. I have to run. Thank you for your call. Have a good long weekend. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone there in Cambridge. Paul's talking about something they call carbon leakage. It's when manufacturers go to places without carbon taxes because they don't want to pay them. And a lot of the people who support a domestic carbon tax thinks we should probably be taxing carbon leakage as well, i.e., the government will charge you a tariff on anything coming from a higher emissions jurisdiction, so you get a carbon tax on top of your carbon tax. Is any of it worth it to you? Again, it's 13 megatons of emissions. It's 13 million tons of CO2 equivalent. Is that worth it? That's all I want to know. We have to stop for a short break. More calls coming up next. I'm David Smith. This is News Radio.
Something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
By 2030, the carbon tax is going to cost the Canadian economy 0.6% of annual GDP. 0.6%. But it's going to reduce our emissions by 13 megatons of greenhouse gases. Is that worth it? It comes at a cost that everybody pays. But is that worth it? Anne in Ottawa. Hi, Anne.
Most of the calls have been really great, except for the guy I'd like to buy a ticket to Realityville, the one living off the grid.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, fella. Most of us cannot live the way you do in your little idyllic life. I'm in a condo building. It's heated by natural gas. What does he suggest I do? Somehow put some kind of solar panels on my balcony to heat my apartment so I don't have to run it? And what kind of cruel government is punishing people in a cold country for heating their places with fossil fuels, the cheapest form of heat there is, in the winter so they don't freeze to death? I mean, that's ludicrous. And, I mean, even if there are people, and there are probably more lower income people who get more back than they think they're spending, they're still spending more for groceries. Everything costs more. This whole thing has, you think that this hasn't had an effect on the cost of living that we're suffering right now? Like, I mean, I hear so many liberals say, oh, it's all around the world. No, nobody's getting smacked the way we are. And we have a crazy ideology-driven government that is just driven by this madness. And I think we just heard from the only guy who's going to vote for Trudeau, the guy living off the grid.
So it's not worth it to you. It's not worth it.
No,
to
it's
pay more.
killing our economy. That's all there is to it. It's not worth it. And anybody who thinks somehow this is the best tax ever, we're getting more back. I mean, they've already shown our carbon emissions are not less. Why are they spewing that it's suddenly going to be less? And the guy, I think it was Russ, that guy for prime minister, I'm telling you.
Okay.
The one, because the most brilliant thing he said that I would like to reiterate, the best thing you could do for the emissions of the world is for us to send scads of natural gas to China and India.
Thank you, Ann. Got to run.
Okay.
It's time to talk back
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
Second half of Talk Back today on News Radio. It's David Smith here, keeping you company on this Friday before the long weekend, talking about the carbon tax and climate change and action on climate change. Last year, Canada emitted 702 megatons of CO2 equivalent greenhouse gases. Our target for emissions reductions is 440 megatons by 2030. So we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 262 megatons over the next 6 years. That's the goal. Environment Canada says the consumer carbon tax is going to reduce emissions by 13 megatons over that same period. The industrial carbon tax will add another 62 megatons of emissions reductions over that period. So the whole carbon pricing policy is good for 75 megatons, give or take, by 2030. The portion of that we are all paying directly and indirectly via the consumer carbon tax, 13 megatons. So does that make sense to you? Brass tacks, we're fighting about a policy in the carbon tax that accounts for 13 megatons of emissions reductions. And it's going to impact the GDP of Canada by 0.6%. Is that a good deal? Is that worth it? 1-833-668-2577. Back to the phones. Up next, Peter in Calgary. Hi, Peter.
Good afternoon. I was going to say good morning, but it's already afternoon here.
Yes, it is.
Thanks for taking my call. So if the government claims that the average person is getting more money than they pay into the system, where does the funding come from to actually implement this program in collecting the carbon tax and redistributing it if it's a self sort of paying program, right?
Oh, it's a good question. So
I think it's more of a Ponzi scheme than anything else.
So here's how that works, Peter. There are many people who work at the CRA and at Climate Change Canada who administer this thing. It costs $200 million a year to administer the carbon tax, to send out those rebate checks. $200 million a year. And that comes out of whatever departmental budget there is for the people doing that work. But because the carbon tax itself does not add to the government's coffers, they send all the money back, it's still considered revenue neutral, quote unquote. So it's revenue neutral less $200 million in administration costs. Does that make sense?
I'd love to see the audits on that one because I think there's a bunch of BS in there. Oh. The other thing is the gentleman that talked about going off the grid and that, I was listening to him, and the average person, I'm gonna go through this because I worked in the industry for quite a while, and I've seen a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, a couple of people that converted to geothermal, solar panels, disconnected from the gas, all that. So if you were to go to geothermal on your house, it's going to cost you $80,000 minimum on top of your mortgage payment. If you go to heat pumps, it's $40,000 once it's all set up and going. If you go to solar with battery backup, it's at least $60,000 to do that. So let's say you do the geothermal and the solar, you're looking at $140,000 minimum to go off the grid.
Oh yeah, it's very expensive. That's the startup cost, the initial investment for all of this stuff, very expensive, and then the savings come in over a period of many, many years.
And the thing is, your battery backups, including cars, so EV cars, they last about 8 to 10 years maximum.
Yep.
Now you're looking at a bill of $20,000 to $40,000, depending on how big your package is, to replace it. So this is, you'll never get your money back on this stuff. It absolutely never will. I've done the math over and over again, and you'll never get it back.
Well, it just depends on the kind of choices and lifestyle that you want to have. I mean, it's supposed to be a free country. It is still.
Oh, you're
but
right.
if you're going to drop, let's say if you drop $100,000 to outfit your house with heat pumps and solar panels, well, you can't move then. You're not going to recoup those costs if you move and sell the house, right?
Now, travel trailer off-grid, that's probably your best option. If you want to go off-grid, get a travel trailer, get one of these portable solar systems with a little generator, and you'll be doing fine.
Thank you for your call today, Peter. Great to talk with you. That's Peter in Calgary. Let's go next to Mary in Kitchener. Hello, Mary.
Just a second.
Hello. Hello.
Oh, is that David?
Yes, we have you now. Mary, what's your opinion today?
Oh, my gosh. These numbers are baffling my brain.
It's a lot of numbers today. I'm sorry about that.
Well, yeah. Okay. Can you tell me the number of emissions that we have due to the carbon tax? How much has it reduced our emissions? I'd like a number.
They don't have a number on that yet. They say it'll take more time. They need more data.
Oh, come on. This is since 2015.
2019 was when the carbon tax came in.
Well, that's when Trudeau said he was all,
So what I can tell you is that since 2019, I've got a little graph here. Since 2019, Canada's emissions have come down about 50 megatons. And
I don't want to talk megatons. I want to talk 0.8, 0.08,
Oh yes, okay. Well, so in that context, then it's about 1%. We've managed to reduce the emissions by about 1%.
I don't think that's a big deal.
It's not very much. It's not very. We need to do much more than that to hit these targets.
All right. Why are we selling coal to China?
It's a good question. A lot of people have jobs in the coal industry. A lot of jobs, a lot of money.
Don't hit us with the carbon tax, and then you sell coal to China. And then you refine oil from other countries off the eastern shore. Like, this is stupid. And Trudeau and Morneau bought us a pipeline, $4.5 million from Kinder Morgan, and it was in disrepair, and they were going anyway. So now we're the proud owners of a pipeline. When Trudeau says, we're not having oil no more. Well, I'm telling you, I can't stand people that talk out of both sides of their mouth. I really can't. And I'll tell you one other thing.
Okay.
All right. So I've called into many talk shows, and I say, what is this carbon tax supposed to do when we get money back? And, change your habits. Well, I don't go anywhere. Gee, I'm 81. I probably wouldn't even see a heat pump give me any good. And yet we get a check.
Well.
And it goes to my husband, and that really ticks me off.
All right, Mary, I got to run for today. Thank you.
No, but I'm saying.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate the call. I need to move along today. We're a little over time for the break. I understand what your point is, Mary. You've made your point thoroughly enough. What is the point of the carbon tax? Well, they say it's going to reduce emissions by that much little bit more. Right? It's an every little bit helps kind of argument. I just want to know if you think it's worth it. 1-833-668-2577. We'll stop here. Back in moments. I'm David Smith. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
There's another really interesting line in this carbon tax report from the Parliamentary Budget Officer that I don't think is getting enough attention. I found this really interesting because you hear the Prime Minister often talking about the costs of climate change. Yes, fighting climate change comes with costs, but think about the costs of not fighting climate change, all the damage that comes from more severe weather events happening more often, driven by global climate change. Well, it's a good point. Extreme storms and extreme temperatures cost the Canadian economy as well. But how much can reducing Canada's emissions really impact the costs of global climate change? Hard to quantify. Hard to prove. Here's what the PBO says, quoting from the report here. Canada's own emissions are not large enough to materially impact climate change, and therefore their reduction would not materially affect the Canadian economy. Of course, significant reductions in global emissions would help to lower the economic costs of climate change in Canada and elsewhere, end quote. Canada's own emissions are not large enough to materially impact climate change. Therefore, their reduction would not materially impact Canada's economy. Isn't that interesting? Reducing Canada's emissions doesn't have enough of an impact on global climate change for them to calculate how much money we'll save in the long run by paying a carbon tax right now. I thought that was interesting. Didn't see that in any of the news stories I read about this report. 1-833-668-2577. Back to the phones on Talk Back on News Radio. We have Afif in Waterloo. Hi there.
Hey, how's it going?
Good,
David?
good. What's your take on this today?
Well, okay, the carbon tax is horrible because, here's the thing. The guy who's saying, you can live off the grid and everything. I have a $67,000 debt for school.
Yep.
and I am also paying on top of that with my house. And then I'm driving a 2012 Volkswagen Jetta, which has like almost 250,000 kilometers on it.
Yep.
And I have a phone that's basically like from 1994.
Okay.
So I can't afford like an electric vehicle at all. That's not possible for me because I asked the person, I was like, oh, how much do I have to pay like per month? They're like, oh, you have to pay about like $340 a month.
Yeah.
But they wrote bi-weekly. I was like, that's like almost $600. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't do that because that's impossible for me. So, and I'm also doing Uber. So I don't even have like a really good job to to do the payments. So what can I do? That's why I think the carbon tax is not great.
So for you, Afiv, it's not worth it. It's not worth. Yeah. Canada's emissions are too small. We're not a big enough fish. It's not going to make a difference for you.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Thank you for the call, Afiv. I appreciate that. Thank you. 1-833-668-2577. Is it worth it? You're out a couple $100 a year, but you're helping to reduce Canada's emissions. Good deal? 1-833-668-2577. And again, it may not be you specifically going out to buy the electric car to take your house off grid, but the government's point about this policy is if some people do it, if it's enough to motivate some people, it's another drop in the bucket. Every little bit helps. Doug in Halifax. Hi, Doug. Doug in Halifax. Hello. No, we don't have Doug. Sean has just called in from Calgary moments ago. Hello, Sean.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you today?
Great. My question here is that additional revenue has been drawn through additional or from GST being charged on the carbon tax. And if that dollar value is actually being contributed back towards the efforts that the federal government is doing to reduce emissions.
Not directly, no. It would go into general revenue.
Back in 2019, that was one of the arguments that the opposition party had to say this is a cash grab, right? How do you charge tax on a tax? How do you account for that additional revenue that's being made? So if the claim is that the carbon tax is carbon neutral and everybody's getting back, the same amount that they put into it, then it's going to be coming from somewhere. So one would assume or presume that is coming from additional GST that's being brought in. But if they can't account for that value of additional GST, then yes, everything that we've got is going up, and they can't account for how that is being spent to reduce emissions either.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that. That's a very good point, Sean. Yeah, thank you for raising that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care. To Sean's point, get a load of this. I was going to save this for later in the hour, but I have to get to it now because Sean just brought it up. I don't blame Sean for thinking that because there's a carbon tax, they charge GST on top of it, that's going to be a windfall for the government. I don't blame Sean for thinking that. I used to think that too, until I read this report. This is crazy. So, the parliamentary budget officer says the overall budgetary impact will be limited to the reduction in net personal income tax revenues due to the economic impact of the fuel charge, which is only partially offset by higher GST revenue. What does that mean? Because the carbon tax impacts the economy as a whole, because it lowers people's incomes, the government's actually losing money on this whole thing. Yes, there is higher GST revenue because of higher prices, but it does not account for all of the lost income tax, according to the parliamentary budget officer. How much? $1.5 billion this year, and by 2030, $4 billion. So they're adding to the deficit. The government's adding to the deficit via the carbon tax. It's a money loser for the government. I couldn't believe that when I read that yesterday. 1-833-668-2577. I'm David Smith. This is News Radio. So we've cleared the phone lines for the first time in an hour and a half. We now have open phone lines for you. Give me a call. We can keep talking about this. I'm open and talking about other stuff as well. I'm here until the end of the hour. 1-833-668-2577. Back after this. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now. Hello. 1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Is it worth it? If you're out a couple of $100 a year because of the carbon tax, but you're helping to reduce Canada's emissions, is that worth it? Is it a good deal? 1-833-668-2577. Time for a call before the bottom of the hour. It's Mike in Calgary. Hi, Mike.
Hey, I've got 2 points.
Yes.
First thing is, like the guy said about the GST, but my 2 points are, first is, I don't believe what they're saying about getting more, because who's ever had an audit? Like, it's political words until there's actually a big cross-section of audits to actually see. And I'm really upset that we don't see when we go to the gas stations, we don't see how much carbon tax is on the total, like, that accounts for the total bill. It says GST, but not carbon tax.
Yeah.
And so I guess I have 3 points. That's my second one. And then my third one is how, like, the people that have swallowed it and believe it, that, the Earth's going to die and all this stuff, just look at the politicians who are pushing it on us. They're not living it. Like, Justin Trudeau, there's no way he's never paid a cent of the carbon tax.
No, probably not.
He has no problem flying around the world for every little thing. And he lived in government-supported stuff. He gets paid. He gets his food by us. He's never paid it himself. He lives in Quebec, so they have the cap and trade. So his home, whatever his private residence, never pays it.
You're not wrong. So it's not worth it. It's not worth it for you, Mike.
And then, it's lies. Then Guilbeault, he's flying around, no problem, all the time. And, like, it's all, these guys wouldn't mess a meeting around the world for anything. It's just spend and live it up.
All right. I got you, Mike. We're coming up to the news break here. I got to let you go. Thank you for calling in today. I'm David Smith. More calls coming up after the bottom of the hour. Your news is next.
It's time to talk back
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
David Smith here in for Rob today. Thank you for joining us. It's Talk Back on News Radio. Again, we're talking about the carbon tax. We have new numbers from the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the independent watchdog for parliamentary spending. He has crunched the numbers. The PBO did. These aren't my numbers. I can't do math like this. I can just read the report and tell you what's in it. Let me run this down for you. When you factor in the impact the carbon tax has on Canada's economy as a whole, it wipes out the money you get back from the carbon tax rebates and then some. In Ontario, in the year 2030, this is forward-looking, 2030, carbon tax is at $170 a ton. In Ontario, the average household will lose $903. In Nova Scotia, the average household will lose $580. In Alberta, $697. In Newfoundland, $652. PEI, $575. New Brunswick, $475. Manitoba, $693. Saskatchewan, $894. So that's real money, especially for people in the middle to lower income range. That's real money. That's for the average household, the top 60% of Canadian earners. So the bottom 20% of earners, this is still a money-making tax for them. This is still a government support that supplements their income. But for the vast majority of the middle class in Canada, the top 60%, you're losing money. When you add it all up, you are losing money above and beyond what you get back in the carbon tax rebate. But Environment and Climate Change Canada, does say the carbon tax will reduce Canada's emissions by a further 13 megatons. Is that a good trade-off? 1-833-668-2577. Back to the phones. Caller Mary from Calgary. Hi, Mary.
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Please, go ahead.
What? I only want to comment on the off-the-grid idea. It sounds like our friend is quite single, because I'll tell you, all I've heard all week is the falling birth rate is 6 kids. And I'm telling you, there is no way we could ever go off the grid. I got kids that are working adults now. I got kids in university. I got kids in high school. Most of them all are driving their own cars. There is no way that we could be productive citizens and live off the grid in a cabin. So do you want birth rates or do you want solar panels? Because you can't have both.
Yeah, okay. You know what? I hadn't really thought about it that way, but yeah, living off grid with a whole bunch of kids would be very tough. Some would say impossible. And to your point, Mary, when you've got a bunch of kids at home, the budget's a little bit tight. I mean, an extra $900 a year is real money, right?
That's right. And we're probably never going to get back everything that we pay in a carbon tax, because we are also small business owners, and there's carbon tax collected on my utility bills that the government has not yet figured out how to rebate back to me.
Oh, you should check on that, because I did hear something from the CFIB earlier this week, I think, that there has been some movement on that. So I would look into that, Mary.
Yeah.
I think there's final, but you're right. For the last 5 years, I think it was up to $2.5 billion hadn't been remitted back to small businesses as well. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, so I'm paying out for my business and I'm paying out for my family, and I can't wait till this government is gone.
All right. Thank you for your opinion today, Mary.
Thank you very much.
That's Mary in Calgary. I'm David Smith, 1-833-668-2577. Like, I'm not against climate change action. I'm not. I think the output, what they call the output-based pricing system, that's the national cap-and-trade system they have for industrial emitters, they say that's going to reduce Canada's emissions by 62 megatons by 2030. That's real progress. I have no problem with that. It's the part where the government is punishing people for living their lives when there are no alternatives available that I don't like. That's the part that they should get rid of, in my humble opinion. The consumer carbon tax. And they say you'll get more back in rebates, but that's only true if you're talking about just the carbon tax that you pay at the pump or that you pay on your heating bill. It doesn't factor in the fact that the carbon tax drives up the cost of everything from food to footwear. And when you do that math, everybody's losing out except for the bottom 20% of earners in Canada. So when they say average household, they really mean the middle 40%. And everybody in the top 60% is losing money on this thing. So that's anyone, if you want a dollar figure, that's anyone making more than $63,000 a year before taxes. If you're in that range, you're losing money on the carbon tax. You are. This has been proved now. If you make less than that per household, the bottom 40% of earners, then you'll still get more money back in carbon tax rebates than you pay. If you drive less than 15,000 kilometers a year, oh yeah, that's the other part we have to talk about too. That's what they consider to be average. So even if you're in that lower medium income range where they say you're getting all the money back, if you drive more than 15,000 kilometers a year, you might not be. And I know there's a lot of people out there, if you live anywhere outside of a city, you're probably driving more than 15,000 kilometers a year. I certainly have driven that amount or more already this year. So if you're in the highest income quintile, that's what Statistics Canada uses to measure income. Quintiles. It's a little technical, but bear with me. Top 20% of earners in Canada are pulling in $146,000 a year and up. before tax. So if you're in that range, good for you. You're making a good living. In Alberta, if you're making more than $146K a year before taxes, by 2030, you're going to be paying $3,122 a year in carbon taxes. That's a net loss above and beyond the rebates that you'll get. In Ontario, $3,467. In Nova Scotia, $2,593. Now, I get if you're making $500,000 a year, if you're way up there in the 1%, $3,000 a year, it's not that much money for you, probably. I don't know. I don't make that kind of money. But $146,000 before taxes. Think about that. If you're a single income household, you have a couple of kids, $3,000 is probably going a long ways. But according to the government, if you're making that kind of money, you're doing fine, right? You don't need any help. You're in the 2 out of 10 households that ought to pay a little more to support people who earn less. That's not my opinion. That's the government's own numbers. They're all here in this report. So is it worth it? When you add all of that up, when you think about how much Canada's emissions are actually contributing to the problem of global climate change, is this policy still worth it? 1-833-668-2577. Give me a call. Would love to hear from you. We'll take a short break. I'm David Smith. You're listening to News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Carbon tax, carbon tax, carbon tax. David Smith here in for Rob Snow today. Axe the tax, keep the tax. Following the latest report on how much the carbon tax costs us, what do you think about this contentious government policy now? Is it worth it to keep fighting the carbon tax? 1-833-668-2577. Again, in Ontario, the average household will be out $903. In Nova Scotia, $580. In Alberta, $697. Above and beyond those carbon rebates that you get, you're still out. But you're fighting climate change. For that spending, for your $903 here in the province of Ontario, you will receive bragging rights that you helped reduce Canada's emissions by 17 megatons. Good for you. 1.8%. It's 1.8% of Canada's annual emissions. That's what the carbon tax is good for. Less than 2%. But it's not nothing. Caller Linda on the line from Calgary. Hi, Linda.
Hey, how are ya?
I'm good. What's your take on this one?
Okay, first of all, we are not the guilty party in the world for all this carbon. We are not. Okay. Secondly, everyone knows that trees and vegetation take out carbon from the air. So we have billions of trees here in Canada that are actually unemployed because we don't emit that much CO2 or whatever the carbon.
Yep.
Now, either axe the tax or figure out a way how to tax the trees for doing their job, because we pay taxes on our job. Sounds stupid. It sounds stupid because it is.
That's hilarious.
Because we have a prime minister that is a drama teacher, not a politician, and doesn't know anything but how to spend Canadian dollars and leave his trust fund alone. So I think we should, either axe the tax or Trudeau figure a way out how to, take these beautiful trees in the autumn and tax them. Just my take on it, because I don't think we should have to be paid carbon tax. I think that's stupid.
Right. So
tax on a tax on a tax. Like,
regardless of the end result, which is eliminating some of Canada's emissions, for you, it doesn't make sense to ask Canadians. Think about the nature of our country. So many places in this country, there's no public transit, and it's cold, and there's no charging infrastructure for EVs, and heat pumps aren't going to work for a couple of months in the winter. It's not fair.
You're right. But the thing is carbon tax is a tax on a tax on another tax. So you're taxing taxes. So tax the tree.
Okay. Thank you, Linda. Great call today.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
That's Linda in Calgary. Yeah, for many years, up until... don't quote me on this. Late 90s, early 2000s, Canada was a net carbon sink for a long, long time. Meaning that our trees removed enough CO2 from the atmosphere that it offset the CO2 we emit via industry and cars and living. It's not the case anymore. It's not the case anymore. Canada does emit 702 megatons, whatever that means to you. So the goal is to reduce that. But again, all of these carbon reduction strategies have various levels of effectiveness. Like, I agree with making oil sands companies pay a little bit to offset the emissions that come out of their work. That makes sense to me. They're making billions and billions and billions of dollars in profit. They can pay a little bit for the carbon that they spew into the atmosphere. And that industrial carbon pricing system, again, they say by 2030 that will reduce emissions by 62 megatons. Not 13, 62. So for the consumer carbon tax that you and I have to pay for just 13 megatons of emissions, when you put that into context, I don't think it seems worth it. I don't think it seems worth it. What about you? 1-833-668-2577. Give me a call. We'll stop here, take our final break, and we'll be back until the top of the hour. This is Talkback. You're listening to News Radio. I'm David Smith. We're back right after this.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now. Hello. 1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Final few minutes of Talkback for this week. I've been very much enjoying the conversation with you all day long today. Let's get back to it. Talking about the carbon tax. Is it still worth it to pay the carbon tax to reduce emissions, even if you're not getting all of the money back? Caller on line 1 is Giorgio in Calgary. Hi there.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. What's your take on this one, Giorgio?
I'd love to say we can get rid of the carbon tax, but we can't because our government has done so much spending that we're in so much debt, we have to keep paying this carbon tax, even though there's no benefit to the general pop or very few. We have to keep paying this tax because of our government spending.
Okay, so above and beyond what it does to fight climate change, you think
that's incorrect. No, it does not fight climate change. And it's only, why is it only implemented in like North America? Why is China ignoring this? The biggest polluters in the world. Why is it like we have to suffer and they don't? It's hogwash. Sorry.
Well, I don't disagree with you on that. I'm just saying the government numbers say that it does show an effect on emissions. It's not very big. It's very, very small.
We need carbon.
But
we need carbon in the atmosphere for our plants, for our trees.
Right. Okay.
For stuff to grow, we need.
I'm not disputing that. So it sounds like you're not really a believer in climate change, then, Giorgio.
I do not believe. Yes, climate is changing, but how can you tax that? How can you tax the world from rotating? That's ridiculous. It's just a ridiculous tax. Yes, climate will change as the seasons go on, and you're going to tax me because we go from summer to winter. It's ridiculous.
Well, not quite. The idea of the carbon tax, you make emitting carbon more expensive, that will influence people's behavior to do less carbon-intensive things.
No, everyone has to work. Everyone gets to work using a vehicle, emitting emissions. That has to happen.
Sure, but the idea being to limit it to a level below what is happening already.
How do you do that?
Well, when driving electric cars, taking public transit, et cetera.
Good comment. Electric cars. Where do they get their electricity from? For the last 20 years, it was coal-powered power plants.
Yeah, but not anymore. By and large, not anymore, Georgia. The electricity system is where Canada's achieving the most emissions reductions right now. It's leading the way because of part Alberta's done with coal.
This is a huge topic you want to talk about, electric vehicles, like lithium batteries, and what happens when lithium batteries get wet. They start on fire. You want to talk about emissions? You want to talk about pollution? There's a bigger polluter than emissions from your vehicle.
Well, no. That's not true. That's not true, Giorgio. All right, we're right at the end of the hour. I got to let you go. A little bit misinformed there, unfortunately, from that last caller, but I did my best to get him back on the straight and narrow. Well, thank you so much for all of those calls all day long. Really interesting discussion. Again, took calls for 2 hours. I had one single person tell me it is worthwhile to pay a carbon tax to reduce Canada's emissions. Everybody else who called me, not that they're against reducing emissions, they just don't think it's worth it. Very interesting. That's it for us this week. Have a great Thanksgiving long weekend, everyone. We will be back in on Tuesday. Stay tuned. Your latest breaking news coming up next.